Reminder there of the scenes which played themselves out in the country in the past week, and I am joined in studio now by Bonga Makhanya. He is a Wits student leader, an activist. Thank you for joining us. I'm also joined by Sthembiso Dabula. He is she is the Wits SRC deputy president, and she sits right next to me. And then I've got Solami Buthelezi, Wits SRC member. Thank you all for joining me. I want to start off with the scene of that vehicle, the mortuary van that you've just seen in the pictures. That was on Wednesday. That was the body of Mthokozisi Ntumba being taken from the scene where he took his last breath. I want to find out from you, and this is a question I want to ask of all of you, his death in relation to the struggle against fees in the higher education sector. What does his death symbolize for you?
I'd like to believe that his death symbolizes a revolution. The reason why I'm saying this, it's mainly because it's not a secret that in South Africa, for something to change, people have to die. For instance, when the Freedom Charter was made and discussed in Kliptown in 1955, a mandate was given to say that the doors of learning and culture must be open, education must be free, and the people that died there. Now we are fighting for the same call. We are mandated by the Freedom Charter as students, and we are making the government to account, and whenever we call for free education, it seems as if you are not going to be arrested, if you are not going to be killed, we are never going to be heard. Time and time again, we always come and cry for the same thing, year in, year out. Yeah. And it seems as if the only change we are yet to see, it's mainly because of the death that was caused during the protest.
Bonga, for you, the death of Mthokozisi Ntumba on Wednesday, what does it symbolize for you?
I think instantly there was a huge shock, and it just reminds us just how much this government doesn't care about black bodies, but especially black youth. That when young people take to the streets, the first instinct is to shoot and kill. So for me, it just shows as to how much this government doesn't care about young people in this country. As far as chasing them, students were chased around the Braamfontein precinct and being aimed at and shot. And that's why Mthokozisi Ntumba died, because he was being chased and they shot at him at close range and he passed away. So it just speaks to how this government just does not care, and it speaks to how youth in this country is not taken seriously. And that's something we've been saying for a while, that leaders in this country need to start taking young people seriously. And it's unfortunate that they've showcased that unseriousness and lack of empathy by killing one of our own.
Solami?
I'd just like to track back to when you were describing the situation and you said he was an innocent bystander. And I think we have that sort of language to blame as to why our parents and communities cannot sympathize with us. In fact, they might think we're hooligans. It's because of the language that the media feeds them to say that he was an innocent bystander, and perhaps it implies that the inverse is that we are guilty participants. And we need to stop that kind of language so that we can conscientize our communities, because what his death means, Ntumba, is that we are all interrelated. We cannot separate our struggles from each other. His death, in fact, is one of the things that drive forward the revolution. Because if they manage to defer our revolution now, if they manage to squash and keep us silent, what about his kids? His children are not going to be sympathetic to the state. His children also might understand our plight for free education, and they might also revolt the way we do. So the more they try to squash our aspirations, the more they try to squash our activism, the more they reignite it. So cases like him are definitely unfortunate. They are unnecessary. He did not need to die. But what happens is that the more they think they can silence our revolution, is the more they ignite it.
I take on board your issue with the language that we media practitioners have employed, but I suspect it's got to do with whether or not he was part of the protest. I think that's more importantly what I think we were trying to highlight, that he was not part of the students, but that's not to excuse the behavior of the police, because the footage that we saw it was footage of people who were just milling around. They were not doing anything that was illegal, and then drives up the police nyala, and what happens? Everybody just runs for cover, because I suspect that's what police have become in the country. I want us for a moment to pause this discussion, because we're... Very good afternoon to you. If you're just joining us, this is Newsfeed, the weekend edition, and we continue the conversation around the issue of fees in the higher education sector. I'm joined by Wits student leader Bonga Makhanya, Wits SRC Deputy President Sthembiso Dabula, and Solami Buthelezi, who is a Wits SRC member. I want to pick up Sthembiso on the issue of the shutdown, the national shutdown. SAUS, which is the South African Union of Students, that's the umbrella body which encompasses all the SRCs in the 26 universities. The understanding is that a national shutdown has now been declared. For how long is this going to go on for?
I believe it's going to go as long as we have our demands not responded to. We are still going to have a national shutdown, because it doesn't make sense for us to only shut down for a day. So if you're going to shut down, we have to shut down for as long as they're going to respond. So if they're not going to respond to anything, the national shutdown should continue. Mainly because in 2015 and in 2016, when the student leaders that came before us fought for free and decolonized education, they didn't do it for a day. The government had to respond to their cries. So we are also shutting down until the government responds to our cries. It's important to highlight that the concept of free education is not new. The government knows about free education. It's in their policies. It's in the Freedom Charter. It's in the National Democratic Revolution. So it doesn't make sense for student leaders to have to protest time and time again, to even call for a national shutdown for the government to hear our cries. So at this point, sure.
I'm going to come back on the issue of the promise of free education by the current government. For the moment, I want to come to you, Bonga, and I want us to look at the Wits Vice-Chancellor spoke for the first time this past week, and what was the most important takeout for you from his address? That's Zebulon Vilakazi.
Look, Xoli, it's indeed correct that Vice-Chancellor Zebulon Vilakazi spoke, but Vice-Chancellor Zebulon Vilakazi spoke and said absolutely nothing. There was absolutely no takeaway from what before he said what he said and after, in terms of anything new. He told us that the university has lots of debt and it will be financially unstable for them to take on more debt, so to allow our students to register. So in our case, he hasn't said anything in terms of that speaks to our demands and speaks to why we took to the streets to protest. Because if he had said something meaningful, he would have at least made us halfway and said, okay, let's allow these students to register for the 2021 program, and let's work together in finding money or raising money to helping them maybe, let's say, bring this 50% that they need to register. But he met us with the same sort of level of arrogance that they've been meeting us the whole year, where they've been telling us that the university doesn't have money. UWC said all students can register. UCT said all students can register, regardless of their financial background. So I don't understand why Wits University is adamant on not meeting us halfway in any of our demands. I'm sure you would know we submitted 15 lists of demands to the VC. We met with only one of those demands. The rest they rejected.
Solami, the Vice-Chancellor, Zebulon Vilakazi, yes, you're saying that he said nothing in his first address around this issue this past week, but he did say that the issue of student debt is not just a Wits problem. In fact, he characterizes it as, quote-unquote, a national crisis. Do you agree with him, at least on that score?
No, we definitely agree that it's a national crisis, and we realized this early, that when we are protesting inside Wits, we're speaking to the wrong person. Vilakazi himself is powerless and very toothless in that structure that he leads. So we realized that if we take our fights outside, even his handlers are going to see and respond on his behalf because he doesn't have the capacity to respond to our issues. The least he can do is try find solutions, meet us, hear what we have to say. But the VC has been in Wits management for a very long time. And prior to this year, when he became the VC, we've known how arrogant he was. He was chairing disciplinaries of Fees Must Fall students, lynching them. So we know that he has no favorable stance towards free education. We've had countless interactions with him. He is not the progressive black that we thought he would be. In fact, he's super aggressive. So we think that he's not the correct person to talk to anyway. But it must always be clear that as Wits students, our first point of protest was our campus. So yeah.
Sthembiso, the body, it's called Universities South Africa. That's the body that represents the 26 universities. I think you will either disagree with me or agree with me that that is how I would characterize University South Africa. It's the person who leads it or speaks on his behalf, Professor Ahmed Bauer. He was quoted in the City Press this past afternoon as saying, universities are facing other severe financial stresses. Therefore, it is not possible to write off student debt. How do you respond to that?
I think it is possible to write off student debt, mainly because, you know, I was actually going through an article yesterday to see where the COVID relief fund, the 500 billion, where it went. No amount of money was allocated to higher institutions or institutions of higher learning, knowing that we have accommodation crisis, we have financial exclusions yearly, and the COVID year was a very unprecedented year, mainly because parents lost their jobs, parents lost businesses, and not all of them were relieved by the government. Businesses lost on business. Many students were defunded by bursaries. NSFAS did exactly the same thing, where it defunded students. So why did the government not take the 500 billion and allocate it to institutions of higher learning, knowing that there's a crisis in the institutions of higher learning? So at this point, it's the people in government choosing to ignore that education is important. Hence, I'll go back to what the Freedom Charter said, to say that we are mandated by the Freedom Charter, yet the same government is failing to follow the same Freedom Charter that was enacted.
Bonga, the argument here by Bauer is that, and I want to quote him again, he says it's not just a question of time. In fact, he says it is just a question of time before the effectiveness of our universities is undermined. Is the call for free higher education a risk to the quality of output by universities?
I think that's probably the most lazy argument I've heard in my life. The call for free education is not a call to say lecturers or academic staff are going to pay or be paid less, or anything that affects their incomes, which would then inform their decision perhaps to go abroad or maybe to be under-resourced in terms of the tools and resources that they have at their disposal. The call for free education is saying that the government must take on the responsibility of ensuring that there's free education for everyone. So they are the ones who are going to pay. Instead of bailing out SAA, the 10 billion rand that they paid out, they're going to go now redirect that money to higher education so that students like myself who can't afford higher education at the rate that it's at can go to school and access higher education. So we're saying we want the government to reprioritize its budget towards the youth, but also in particular higher education. It can't be that we're bailing out failing SOEs year in, year out. Money, the AG has reported year in, year out the levels of corruption. So if we had competent people in the government, young people by the way, if we had young competent people in government who would use our resources efficiently, we can realize the goal of free education. It's a matter of political will, prioritization, and also a matter of competency. People that are eager to sort of drive this country, and those people are young people, not the old people that are sitting in parliament and sitting in the decision-making processes. Because I'll say to you, let's look at UWC or UCT as an example, where there was a political will to allow students to register. Why is that not reflected in all institutions? So that's one example of there being a will to assist students. And if that is reflected nationally from people like Blade and Butimanamel, then we can start realizing things like free education, because people want to do it. But I don't think this government is interested in doing it.
Solami, what makes UWC, which has said, regardless of whether you owe fees or not, come and register, what makes it different to Wits University, for example, an institution where you are?
I think that perhaps we are inspired by UWC in like Bonga said, showing some sort of will to meet students. And we think that's what Wits University lacks, just will. I mean, Wits University lacks, is the will. But even going deeper into the question, I don't think it should be about the goodwill of vice-chancellors, but rather let's interrogate the kind of state that we're living in. And two scholars do this very well for me. It's Marx and it's Lenin, who identify the states as a site that's captured by a certain class. I'll call it white monopoly capital. So what financial exclusion is, and it's manifesting even in our education system, it's that there's a fear of competition among us who are rising black people into the economy. There's a fear of competition, and also there's a will to protect even the white people who are no longer finding themselves in proximity to power anymore. So this thing, it shouldn't go to how much we praise the VC of UWC about how benevolent he is, but rather let's interrogate the kind of structure and the kind of system that we're living in now. You talk about
the capture of the state. I want to flip that question and ask you, do you believe that the private sector has a role to play in this matter of fees?
Well, the private sector is the actual body that is capturing the states. They use the states to legitimize their actions and their ambitions on us. So they deploy police in order to rubberize us and silence us from accessing our rights. So when you talk about the private sector, you're really just talking about white monopoly capital, who does not care about whether we get our education or not. In fact, theirs is to continue to drive those who occupy parliament, those who occupy key government positions, to make the policies that they need to exploit us and further recontinue our oppression.
When we return, I want us to discuss the party that has made this promise. And interestingly, all of you, you are clad in some way or another in ANC colors. I want to find out from you, what is it that makes you be so loyal to this party? We'll do that in just a moment. You're watching Newsfeed, the weekend edition. Very good afternoon to you. If you're just joining us, I am in conversation with three of University of Witwatersrand students, and they are in the student leadership, some of them. Some of them are activists within the SRC movement. Sthembiso, I want to come to you. You are the deputy president of the SRC at Wits University, but you've also just shared with me during this break that all of you here belong to SASCO, which is a student movement that belongs under the, or belongs to the umbrella that is the ANC. And it's no surprise, therefore, that you are clad in a women's league paraphernalia. What makes you believe that the ANC will ultimately achieve the goal of free higher education?
Okay. I believe that the ANC has brilliant policies, right? And the implementers are sitting here. We are the new dawn. At this point, there's an example I would like to use to say that whenever there are soccer matches, there are people in the game and there are spectators. The spectators can tell the people playing there what to do. But as long as you're not there, you're not going to score the goal. So at this point, we are tired of being spectators. We are tired of saying the ANC is not doing this, the ANC is not doing that. We are here to fix the ANC. We are here to say that if you're going to fail to implement the brilliant policies that you have, we are here to implement those policies. And it's on that ground or basis that we are here and we are still hopeful of the party we are under.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bonga, this past week, the Secretary General of the ANC joined students and they actually led them to the Constitutional Court. And someone asked the question, have the students sought to hold to account Ace Makhashule as a former premier of the Free State and the amount of plundering that happened under his watch? And why should students believe anything that he promises?
Well,
are you naive?
That's a very interesting question. And anyone that assumes that the youth or young people are naive, I think goes back to what I was saying, that they don't take us seriously. Young people in this country understand different roles that different stakeholders play in this country. We're not going to play into any factional battles of the ANC, of the EFF, of the DA, or any old people squabbles. Ace Makhashule is the SG of the ANC, whether I like him or whether I don't like him. Cyril Ramaphosa is the president of the ANC, whether I like him or I don't like him. And as young people, we've taken a decision to say we're not going to enter into factional battles of the ANC. We are going to work with anyone that can assist our cause and that can benefit sort of getting our students back into the system. And we feel that the ANC is a big stakeholder in terms of reaching our demands because they are the ruling party. Blade Nzimande is a deployee of not only the SACP but also of the ANC. So if there's any organization that has to account in terms of why is there no free education, it is the ANC. We have to submit our demands to the Secretary General of the ANC. Whether I think Ace is someone who stole money or not is irrelevant because he is the SG and our demands are related to the ANC. Many of us have our views about the current leaders of the ANC. In fact, we've stated it publicly that currently in the ANC there's a leadership paralysis. There are no leaders in that ANC, but we can't act as if Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't exist or Blade Nzimande doesn't exist. We do think people like Blade Nzimande are incompetent. And we're saying that Blade Nzimande must meet our demands, but it doesn't mean that now we're not going to meet with those stakeholders, whether we like them or whether we don't. So in terms of we're naive or not naive, we know exactly what's happening in the national structures, but we're not going to involve ourselves in those conversations or whatever.
Yeah.
We are going to work with whoever we need to work with to reach the end goal of free, higher, and decolonized education.
Solami, you get to have the final word. There is a party that says, actually, this whole issue of free education is a fallacy to begin with. Why do they say that? Because they are saying, and it's the Freedom Front Plus that says that, by the way, they say that someone out there is paying for your fees. So it's not free education. So why in the world, again I repeat, why in the world do you believe the ANC when it promises you free higher education?
Well, one thing that must always be on record is that young people of the ANC are not cheerleaders of those who occupy positions. We are standing here because we want that machinery that they occupy. We want to be the young people that make the decisions that they make. The decisions they make don't affect them as much as they affect us. Blade Nzimande defunding students is not something he will have to live with, but it's something I will have to live with my peers. It's something my children might have to live with. So that's the thing we are problematizing, to say we believe that the ANC has so much history for young people to guard, but we don't believe that when leaders of the ANC are reckless, then we must be found to be merging with them or found to be in the same conversations with them, because we are not. We are here to occupy that machinery that they are sleeping on. They don't have any concepts of state building or rebuilding or any sort of reconciliation. In fact, if they had that will, history has shown them many times how you build a nation. Afrikaans people did it, the English people did it when they got here. It doesn't look like anything they're doing now. In fact, Africanization happened through a lot of state subsidies into key and strategic areas. They are failing to do that. In fact, they're doing the opposite. They're defunding where they need to be defunding. They're taking away resources where resources should be. So we're saying as young people, we know what those problems are. We know how to diagnose them, and we must fix them our own selves.
Solami Buthelezi, a Wits SRC member, thank you very much for making the time to speak to us. Sthembiso Dabula, Wits SRC Deputy President, thank you very much for your time. Bonga Makhanya, a Wits student leader, thank you very much for making time. All right, well, that was my panel of guests talking about the issues surrounding the demand of free higher education.